Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. It is exactly 9:24 a.m. News and views on Salam Media. And this week marks 2 years since the July 2021 unrest in KZN and, of course, Gauteng that saw rampant violence, widespread looting, and scores of businesses and lives destroyed. To talk to us about this matter 2 years on is social and education activist Narendh Ganesh. He's based in KZN and has kindly agreed to be talking with us this morning. Good morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, ma'am. Thanks for having me on.
One can't imagine that 2 years ago, just how our lives, all of South Africa's lives, were upended. Because even though people may say that some of us were not directly impacted, we weren't at the forefront of all of the carnage and the rampage, it had an impact on our lives in some form or the other. What do you remember of the time, and what do you believe should have been done? Because lots of victims are still saying that they've never been compensated, their case files have disappeared, and we even question the money that government had made available to rehabilitate the damaged infrastructure, very especially in KZN. You are in that part of the world. Have you seen any of the infrastructure being rebuilt? And where do we stand with this whole situation 2 years on? Where are we? Are we beginning to heal, or are there still a lot of issues that need to be addressed?
Without doubt, it was a very harrowing period in the history of this country, in the sense that it was unexpected, firstly, but that it happened clearly reflects the state of our nation. I believe that that was the start of an event caused by some political problem, and what it ended up was a criminal matter. Now, I lived in an area, or I live in an area, which was directly involved in the riots of 2021 July. My area was attacked in the middle of the night, and there was a 4.5 hour gunfight between marauding mobs from surrounding areas, particularly black citizens, noting that the area that I lived was historically known as to be an Indian area. And the violence that occurred as a result of the looting that occurred prior to it um, was terribly destructive to the country, as you quite rightly pointed out, and more importantly as well, to the economy, especially in KZN. It was estimated over about 30 billion rand worth of damage and destruction occurred during those few days. But I personally lay all the blame at the hands or at the door of the president of this country, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, the Minister of Police, Becky Cele, and the Commissioner of Police, National Commissioner. And I say that only because I can comment on the area that I lived in. There were about 40 to 50 police personnel present at the entrance of my suburb. And while the gunfire was going on, they refused to enter the suburb. And the reason being that they responded from different police stations, and they did not have a commander to instruct them to act. As the civic leader of this area, I pleaded with them that they can hear gunfire. Obviously, a crime is being committed. But I did learn later that they were instructed not to go in. And that turned out to be as a result of the racial factor. And probably, President Ramaphosa was watching this in real time on television. The country was watching it, the world was watching it, and he was impotent to act. As a result of his impotency to act as the commander-in-chief, lives were lost. Billions was lost. So at the end of the day, whilst we may want to analyze and do a post-mortem of the events of July 2021, we must realize that all of the upheaval that began at that point in time came as a result of one former president being going into incarceration. And as a result of that, there was a domino effect that resulted in what had happened in KZN and Gauteng on those fateful days.
I read in a recent report that this was really about the struggle between the elitist in our country, the elite government officials in our country. Clearly, it was the different factions within the ANC, the clashes between those factions, which resulted in this large scale destruction, bringing the country almost to its knees, if not to its knees already. I did also pose the question earlier on regarding the infrastructure, the monies that were supposedly promised to KZN for the rebuilding of the infrastructure. What have you seen? Is there any evidence that the monies did go where it was needed most and people were helped to get back onto their feet?
I don't believe it has. People are still reeling from the effects. Many people have lost their jobs as a result of businesses closing down. When shops were burnt and looted and businesses were burnt and looted. So I do not see any tangible, realistic changes that have come about. And in any event, the perpetrators have yet to be brought to book, which is the general theme in South Africa: commit the crime and play for time. Because the longer you delay the due process, the easier it is for you to get away. And I'm more than convinced, and as it was going around in social media during the time, that there were certain elements within the ANC that were instigating the violence because it was to their advantage and serving an agenda that they had prepared for. And sadly, these are the kind of people who we believe once fought for this country. What a joke. They're actually the most unpatriotic people. So the infrastructure we're talking about, I haven't seen any tangible um, changes. In fact, I had given evidence at the Human Rights Commission. I, in fact, confronted Mr. Becky Taylor on a one-on-one because at that point in time, especially in the area of Phoenix, which is historically an Indian area, there was a lot of violence, if we may call it that. But the question arose at that point in time, in the middle of the night, in a built up suburb, what reason does a marauding mob have to march through it? People took action in the protection of their lives, limb, and property. As a result, there were certain deaths that occurred. And I do not believe that the number of deaths in Phoenix, as touted by the Minister of Police as being 36, is a real factor. And I say this because, and I've quoted this previously in the aftermath of the riots, during that time, the mortuary, the Gale Street mortuary in Durban, was closed. And corpses were being brought from various areas to the Phoenix police station. And this number of 36 was reported from Phoenix. And they called it the Phoenix Massacre. It was very expedient to create the hype. But what it did was it created racial tension unnecessarily. But shortly after the effects of the riots, people went back to normal.
Okay, your picture has just frozen there. Let's take a quick, short break. Are you back with us? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, your picture froze there. I just wanted you to reconnect, but you're back again. Um,
Okay.
yes, of course, we do know that the incidents with the marauding mobs in Phoenix created a lot of racial tension, whether it was intentional or whether it was a byproduct of what had started playing out. And we also know that a lot of criminality obviously was at play here as well. Let's look at the issue. So, at this point, all of the monies that were promised to the tune of perhaps close to R1 billion for the rebuilding of the infrastructure there, no one can account for it. That's number one. Did Sasria was Sasria able to at least assist people who've lost homes and businesses in some way or form? Because at some stage, a couple of months ago, we'd heard that Sasria doesn't have the money. They ran out of money to fulfill all of those claims. Where do we stand with all of that now?
I cannot comment on that aspect as I'm not fully aware of the facts. But what I can say is a lot of the businesses had to claim from insurance. There were tons of insurance claims filed. So some of the businesses that were well or adequately covered were recompensated. But I'm not sure whether the rest of it, as a result of Sastria's inability to pay, because funds ran out, which is nothing unusual in the South African context. As long as it comes to serving the people, funds will run out much quicker than we imagine. So, it's a distasteful state of affairs that we are faced with when potential businesses who were budding businesses at the time, growing their businesses, and people employed, and noting our unemployment rate, that they had to lose their jobs as a result. So, it's a multifactorial effect that has occurred to the economy in KZN particularly.
So I'm assuming we won't even be talking about the funding that government supposedly made available for the rebuilding of the infrastructure. At that point, we were also reassured that the money would go where most needed, and the money won't disappear, that there won't be corruption involved. But it seems as if that is exactly what has happened, because nobody seems to be accountable as far as that money is concerned. So let's leave that aside and move on. The racial tensions that were created during this time, very especially the situation where these criminals, march through Phoenix and cause such mayhem, has that calmed down? Are the tensions, or are the relationships between Indians and the African people, has it been rebuilt? Are people beginning to trust each other and realize that when we rebuild, we're rebuilding not for Indians, not for Black people, not for coloreds, etc., but for us as a people of the country?
Okay, let me put it to you this way. A day before the actual riots began or the looting began, everything was as normal as it was in the years and months before that. There was no problem. During those fateful days, obviously, tensions built up as a result of the marching and the trouble that occurred. But a few weeks after the end of the looting and violence, everything went back to normal. Of course, there was a bit of tension created as a result of the hype and the hysteria that media also brought into play when they declared the Phoenix massacre. But people have gone about their lives, daily lives, because most people work together. As a community of South Africa, we are not in isolation as a race. We work together, we communicate, and people live their lives as normal. To this day, I don't see any tension in any aspect. Obviously, hidden agendas still exist. People may have reservations about another race and stuff. That's innate human nature. But as a outward display of tension, I don't see it any longer in KZN.
Okay, so how do we move on 2 years on? You've indicated that the infrastructure is far from having been rebuilt. People are still jobless, and the hungrier people are. We do know that if their needs are not met, we we're ripe for another uprising. Sad to say, I hope it doesn't come to that, but that is the reality of the situation. Where to from here? And we are all aware, the entire country is aware of the truck burnings at Van Rieenen over the past few days, also in Mpumalanga and in Machadodorp. I spoke to one of the truck ATDF, to Sifiso Nyati, the secretary of the ATDF, just before I had this interview with you. And it seems from what he said to me, because I was afraid that this might be the start of another unrest. But according to what he had shared with me, it seems that it's just a whole lot of irate local truck drivers who have rebelled and have taken to this type of protest action because they don't want foreign truck drivers to take their jobs. So, your thoughts about that situation?
Okay. Just quickly on the infrastructure aspect. Look, most of the shops that were destroyed and the big buildings and stuff have been repaired. But I think the extent to which the repairs were done, like in any damage, does not bring it back to its original form. But that's another matter. Well, unfortunately, the South African government has allowed criminality to fester and fester and fester. They simply have no clue how to control the crime that is spiraling, whether it's by locals or by foreigners or anybody, and in whatever form the crime occurs. And look, the burning of the trucks infuriates me, no matter what your grievance, because those trucks carry vital food for people's existence and survival. And these people who want to make a statement should use other avenues to protest. But the South African community has developed a culture of destruction. They do not value life. They do not have the ethical and moral aptitude to look at protest in a form where you don't have to destroy to make your point. But it is constantly happening. And I lay all the blame squarely at government, because government has the wherewithal, they have the means to actually take control of crime. Our roads are not patrolled as well as they should be. So all crime in South Africa and criminality that is occurring uh, has its roots in government, notwithstanding the kind of corruption that occurs in the bureaucratic halls of our governance in this country. And I think it's time the people stand up, all of us, and not in our kitchens and lounges, but by foot, to stand up and protest, well, obviously without looting and burning, but to tell government, look, it's time that you change your act. And if you don't, we will change you.
Wise words indeed, but do we have the will to go out, to take to the streets and make our voices heard? Perhaps we're way too complacent. A very short answer from you. Do you still have hope that South Africa can overcome all its hurdles and difficulties, all the corruption, the tenderpreneurs, the crooked politicians, and etc., etc., etc.?
I am an eternal patriot, so I will always have hope.
Thank you indeed. God bless you. Stay strong and hopeful and in prayer for all of us. Till the next time, as always, lovely talking with you.
Thank you very much.
It is exactly 9:42 news and views on Salam Media. And of course, we're moving on. We're going to be talking with Darby Root, an economist, to talk about the impact of the truck burnings on the South African economy. And we'll wrap up by talking with my colleague Inayat Wadi, and he's going to tell us about the huge book event that we at Salam Media are putting on. To talk with Azad Essa, the author of the book Homelands.